Welcome back, everybody. So the next couple of videos, including this one, is going to be a whole bunch of random stuff because I'm at the point on the empennage where it's a lot of little things. There I'm showing off the little bolt keeper tool that I made. This is for putting those hinge bolts in. So anyhow, starting on this one, I'm putting the bolts in. No nuts, washers, or anything like that. I'm just using the bolts to hold the elevators in place so I can check for deflection. I need to trim the horizontal stab skin so that the elevators will actually move up and down. If you look at the bottom of the screen right now, you can kind of see that the skin is overlapping the counterbalance and it needs to be trimmed right there on both sides. So I'm getting them attached. I'm going to mark where those cuts need to be made. And then I'm going to check for elevator deflection. I'm going to make sure, as best I can anyways, that there's no twist and the trailing edges are straight. And I'm also going to make sure that both hinges, because they thread in and out, that they're both the right distance out and I have a nice even line all the way across the elevators. And I'm not sure if I'm doing any of this right or wrong, but I'm not going to finalize any of this until I think I attach this to the fuselage later. So there's a hole in the control horns that you have to drill through the middle bearing. And I think I'm going to wait. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I think I'm going to wait until the fuselage is done later on and it's attached and clamped to that to drill those holes. So right now I used I can't remember which number drill bit I used, but I used a drill bit to drill in the corner of where I was going to make that cutout so I had a nice rounded edge. And then I just used the Dremel with a cutoff disc to make the cuts. And you can see right there, one of the big mistakes I recently realized I had, if you look at that counterbalance weight, I notched and trimmed that per the drawing for the right elevator. And it turns out you're not supposed to trim the left elevator counterbalance weight. So I've officially ordered my first screw-up replacement parts, and those have come in. So I've got a new counterbalance weight, and while I was ordering it, I went ahead and ordered a new attachment plate for the trim servo since I wasn't happy about it being off-center. So there you can see the elevator is now free. I've got my little angle finder, digital angle finder there. And I'm just playing with it to see what kind of deflection I'm getting. There's a spot where the horns hit a bracket on that aft spar that needs to get trimmed, but again, I'm not going to do that until later either. Recently got myself a build notebook. I'm going to start writing down all of these little things that I'm holding off for later. You can see it right there. That way, when later comes, I don't forget these things. So now I am trying to come up with what I think is the best way to tell if I've got a nice straight line across my elevators and the horizontal stab. So I've just used that straight edge to trace a blue line right across the very top edge of the rivets in the spar on the elevator, on both elevators. And then I'm going to use my micrometer to check the distance between the trailing edge of the horizontal stab and that line that I made in several spots. And on both elevators, the inboard hinges needed to be adjusted just a half a turn. And once I took them off and made the adjustment, which I'm going to do here in a second, and you can see me checking it, the line ended up perfectly parallel all the way across. So I'm going to assume that means that they are straight all the way across since they have that trailing edge that angles out at both directions. I wasn't sure any better way to measure that. So I took the right elevator off camera, used my little 3D printed tool for the hinge bearing and made a half turn adjustment on it. And now I'm just getting it put back on. I used that little bolt keeper tool I showed you that I made earlier. That thing is invaluable. I couldn't imagine any other way to try and get that bolt up and in there. These are a real pain to get into. I'm not even trying to think about what it's going to be when I have to put an actual nut in there and try and torque that, and yeah, that's going to be fun. That's way later down the road. Yeah, I also found out it's easier to go from the bottom to put them in. You let gravity help you keep the bolt where you want it. So I've got a clamp on the far side. Those are plastic jawed clamps, and I've only got it clamped down enough just to hold the clamp in place and keep the elevator counterbalance even with the horizontal stab. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side now that I made the adjustment. This is definitely a two-person job, but if you finagle it around, you can get away with doing it with one person. It's just hard to keep the elevator from sliding, or the rudder or horizontal stab from sliding on me. So now both the elevators are locked in place by the counterbalances, and I'm not sure why I'm struggling so hard to level this thing. I think I'm just playing around with it more than anything else. There's no real need to level it right now. And that's the longest straight edge I have. So I'm just sticking it on the top and bottom, making sure it looks okay. I did check this before I ever cut those things free. I used a plumb bob along the trailing edge and had the same distance all the way across both sides. So I'm assuming that means they're straight and there's no twist, but we'll see. All right, so that is now hanging up on one of the posts in my garage. I'm not thrilled with where it's at again, but it's safer than it was and it's out of the way. I'll try and figure out something more permanent and safe, because that thing's going to be sitting for a while before it gets touched again. Well, that's not true. I got to put that counterbalance on. So, like I said, when I ordered the counterbalance weight, I decided to go ahead and order that trim cover plate that the servo mounts to. When I did the old servo mount that you saw me disconnect it from there, I followed Van's measurements precisely without ever actually looking to see if the arm was straight inside of that cutout notch. I just assumed that it was supposed to be offset, maybe to clear the pin that holds the clevis. I don't know, but it was definitely not centered, and the rear end of the servo has a stud that moves in and out as well, and it goes through a hole in the spar, and that wasn't centered in the hole. And yeah, it was just bothering me. After going online, I found out it was a common problem, and most people caught it early enough to just move the servo over on their own. I think Van says you can just file that notch open bigger to clear the clevis, and I thought about doing that, but since I had to go ahead and order the counterbalance weight anyways, this part was like $11. I figured I'd just go ahead and order it. I marked the front and back because that part was correct, and then I just visually centered where I wanted that, made some marks, and now I'm drilling the holes and clecoing it in place. I also decided not to prime the skin piece on this one this time. I thought about it after I did the last one. I don't know. Part of me thinks it'll be easier to prime and paint later if don't have to clean the primer off of the outside of that. So, but all the internal parts will stay primed. There you go. It's all deburred, cleaned up. Now I just got to dimple the holes for the screws and then the holes for the rivets. So while I get this riveted on, like I said, this video is a bunch of random stuff. The next one's probably going to be more of the same. At some point, I'll start working on those wing stands, and I'll get that videoed, and hopefully I get some sort of a notice here soon of what kind of timeline I'm looking at for the wings to be delivered. But in the meantime, I'll just keep posting what I can when I can. I'll slow this down again here in a second so you can get a look at the finished product. all riveted in place, back on. Now you can see that arm is centered, and I'll throw up a picture real quick. There you go. Nice and centered in the notch. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.